And I am recording now. Okay, today is April 5th, 2019. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of ITSE 2309 at Collin College. Today we're going to finish up Module 10, and I hope to finish Module 11 by the end of the day. Both of these are fairly easy, but they are fairly useful. Mostly for formatting and changing from one format to the other, mostly with dates, but other things come into play also. But dates are the big thing here. I have pushed out under the announcements this file, so you have this file. It's fairly long, but you don't have to sit there and copy it. Yeah, there we go. If all you do is assign a string to a date, for example, if I have a field and that field has a field that is a date, so I have a table with a date field in it, date or maybe date time, and I try to put something like this into that field, it might work and it might not. Okay. The best thing to do is just remember this: we will always cast dates in SQL. It doesn't matter whether you're in Oracle or SQL Server, it's going to run the same. By the way, I can just say select. I don't have to say select from a particular table. If I just say select a value, it just select it and it will print it for me. So for example, here I'm saying select cast 4519 as a date. This will work. Execute. Now, what would I get if I tried to put this into a date? Well, we'll try it in a minute. I'll create a variable of type date. I find that easier to do than to create a table with a date field. This is today's date. If I felt like saying it like this, it will do the same thing. Notice that this is the default format. So if I say 2019-4-5, that is April 5th. So it's year, month, day, going in descending order, which is kind of the way that this is the native format for database to keep. If you don't say you want to see it any other way, that's the way it shows it to you. I usually don't care how it keeps it. I don't care. I let the web people worry about that. Now, if I have to take dates coming from the web, and I'm not real sure how I'm going to get them handed to me when they come, I don't know what format it is. You have to be kind of careful, and I want to get a little bit of time to talk about this. When you are taking stuff from the World Wide Web, you have to be very careful because you can get malware into your system. You can get SQL. I can trick your server into executing SQL that I send you in the web page. And I'll show you how that happens. That's called SQL injection. It is a problem. It's lots of times the systems will block SQL language at the Bastion host. So if you try to send somebody SQL, it'll get blocked because it won't even let it come in as email. So if I say cast April 5th, 2019 as a date, I will get the same thing. If I want to write it like this, I can write it like that. If I want to write it as 5-4-19, it won't have a bit of problem with it, the way it will interpret it. If it is, let's see, if it's this year minus 50, let's see. Okay, if it's 50 or above, I think it interprets it as 19. So if you say 70, it's going to interpret it as 1970, I believe. best bet is always to say it, always to write the date. But if you don't, it's not going to die. By the way, I can put in the time. So I cast it, and I can add in the time. The time will be a 24-hour clock unless specified otherwise. So 2,200 hours, or 10, 23, and 14 seconds. I can specify an AM. So I can say 10:23 AM. I could also say 10:23 and 14 seconds PM. In that case, it will store it. When it shows me the default time, it will default to 24-hour time, unless I say to show it to me differently. I'm not usually too worried about how I see it. I know it's in the database, right?
So it looks like the best way to unambiguously put in the date is in the format year, month, day.
If you are just putting it straight into, without casting it, the best way to unambiguously put a date in is to cast it. Now, as long as it's, and then check to see how it's interpreting it. If you put it in with the full year and it doesn't die, it doesn't give you an error message. If you put it in with the full year, it'll be fine. If you say 29 February, well, we don't have a 29th of February this year. It's not a leap year. So as soon as I try to put that in, it's going to give me an error. Okay. But other than that, if I say 28, that's a valid day. And so if it takes it, then it interpreted it unambiguously. Okay, so you get to format your dates almost any way you like. Oracle is a little bit different. Oracle has a function that's called toDate, and you'll see that used in other, you see it in Visual Basic similarly, where you call this function, you pass it a date string, and then the second string tells it how to interpret that. So you tell it where the month and where the year and all that stuff is in it. I like this one better, because if I just always cast, I'm safe. Where's everybody today? I don't see Juana. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and declare a date. And declaring stuff is okay. It's easy to do because it's a simpler way to test it rather than putting a date. If I want to use a variable, it's easier to just declare it as a date. But the problem with it is that every time I run it, for example, I can run it like this and it'll be fine. So, and print it. But if I try to run it again and just run a piece of it, that variable won't exist. So the variable goes away in between runs. So I have to go back to the declaration each time. I'm not sure what I was doing here. I'm setting a date, so this is a date. So this is like inserting it into a table, but it doesn't persist between runs. It's just for right now. I'll have it both times. I wanted to show you the difference between this. I'm casting 5 April 2019 as a date, and here I'm just print 5 April 2019. And look at the, got to go back up and do it again. Notice the difference between these two guys. The first one put it into the date format. The second one just printed the string 5 April 2019. It printed a 5, right? So the first one was printing the date,
and the second one is printing the string.
Second one's just printing the string. Okay, and that's confusing to a lot of people. Okay, but when you cast it, it puts it into a date. Now, I don't really, as a database person, I don't worry a whole lot about what comes out of SQL, how I produce output from SQL. Somebody is probably going to have to take my output and format it for the web. But if I always stay with the default format of output, then they'll always know what they're getting from me. And then they get to format it. Most of the time, what they want, what they prefer, is to cast it to a string. So they would probably say, print cast my date This is probably what the web person wants. Okay. Now, what does the web person get? The web person gets a string known. They will know exactly how long it's going to be. They know exactly that the first 4 characters are digits. Then they know it has a dash. Then they know the next 2 characters are the digits of a month. And then there's a dash. And then the next 2 characters are the digits of a year. Now, we're going backwards a little bit. And now we're giving it to the web, but I'm giving it to the web to be displayed on their web page, and now I'm going to let them handle it however they like. Because as an SQL person, you don't spend a whole lot of time formatting stuff for output. Okay. This one. Look, please, at the set my date. Okay, now I'm using a variable here on line 25. I'm using a variable, and officially we have not covered variables, but remember I declared the variable as a date, and now I can use it. So variables in SQL Server begin with the @ sign, whatever you call that thing. They don't in Oracle. It's a little bit different. They don't. Oracle's more like the programming language Ada. But this particular one, now I'm setting a date to 5 April, 2019. What? Is it going to work? And the answer is I don't know. I don't really know what's going to happen here, because it might work and it might not. And therein lies the problem. I don't like it when I don't know what's going to happen. But what I think will happen, I'm hoping will happen, is it will automatically, in other words, it will implicitly cast that string that looks kind of like a date. It will implicitly cast it into a date.
Explicitly casted.
Yes.
Then here I have to do some guesswork, and it slows down the program, and then you cause errors.
Right. We don't. If I don't know exactly what it's going to do, I'm a control freak when it comes to computers, and I don't like computers making decisions for me. We're dealing with one of those now in our aviation industry, where the computer is making decisions on how to control the aircraft, and something is going terribly wrong with the what is it, the 737s?
737 MAX 8 and 9.
And basically,
as far as the pilot,
they are, and of course, it's something much more complicated than this. What we have is the idea of complicated systems have complicated failure modes. I don't know what this is going to do. Now, I do know because I ran it, and I do know that it works. It does cast it, and it puts it into the variable correctly, into its default format.
But cast is a little bit
cast?
Cast is better because cast is explicit. That was the question that came up, unambiguously, right? Cast will never, if it'll either work all the way, all the time, or it'll die. It'll throw you an error message. Error messages are our friend. Even though you might not believe it. Okay, cast. So we always cast. And it looks like this in all of the implementations. This is cast is pure SQL. Now, this particular chapter in the textbook, let's see, this is module 10. I believe it is chapter 8, I want to say. It has a lot of non-standard SQL in it. I'm trying to avoid the non-standard SQL for this class, but there is some here that I think I'm going to cover a little bit because it is, in my opinion, things come into one language and then they're there for a while and they become accepted. And the things I'm going to cover have become accepted across programming, and people are over in Oracle are saying, hey, why aren't we doing this? Usually going the other way. It's usually people in SQL Server saying, hey, why can't we have what they have in Oracle? But this particular one is very good. So
sometimes long, short code does not mean faster programs.
The question was, the observation was, the length of the code doesn't have anything to do with the speed of the program. That is true, particularly so in SQL. SQL, there's certain things you can do that really hurt it. For the most part, SQL is going to be pretty darn fast. Yeah. You want to avoid this. Line 18. This is something that we like to avoid in SQL programming, is dropping over into that getting out of pure SQL. Because when I declare a variable, now I'm in control of that variable, and the system cannot optimize my whatever it is I'm trying to do there. Okay, it may be a good thing, it may look really good, but you generally, if you try to declare variables and stuff like that, you generally are going to you're going to slow it down most of the time. Okay, here's one. Convert. Okay, convert is non-standard. Convert is like cast. Convert is, the reason I'm going to talk about convert is it gives you a code, okay? And I'm not going to go into all of those codes. There are pages and pages and pages of them. I'm going to give you the URL where you can go and read all about the date-time conversions using SQL Server. Okay, so you can go to that, and it will just have a whole page full of all these guys. But if you look at 107, now notice that convert is different. Notice that it's backwards. Convert to a varchar. Cast goes from as to. So convert from this to that. It uses as, it doesn't use to. I always want to put to in there, but it's as. So cast, where is it? So the cast goes this way. Cast this as this. Goes from left to right. Convert this to this. They go in different directions. I wish they hadn't done that. And use this format. The other thing is that convert returns a string of characters, so it's once it comes out of the convert, it's not a date anymore. But this becomes, Juanita, you're talking about wanting, about doing some web pages. This is for formatting for a web page, okay? Convert is your, well, it would help if I would. Let's see. I guess I'll just bring this down. Use for go, go blows it away. Okay. My date. Oh, my date is, I didn't set it. Okay, that should do it.
Semicolon at the end.
Yeah, it's supposed to have a semicolon. I'll add it in there. Now, notice that that when you give it the 107 format, you're going to see it as month in three letters, beginning with a capital letter followed by 2 lowercase letters. If you want to see it in all uppercase letters, then that's a different code. If you want to see it spelled out as APRIL, that's a different code. If you want them all caps, that's a different code. So 107 is just one of the codes. That's one of them that's covered in our book. And if you want to see all of the codes in all their glory, you can go read about them. This is just one of them. So convert, you can convert just about to just about any format you want. You can convert to Julian date. Goodness. So the convert returns a string of characters, not a date and not a number. That's why convert is real handy for sending stuff to a web page. Because how do you want to see it? They will typically tell you, I want to see it in SQL Server format 107. That's what they mean. All you have to do is pass it that code, and it takes care of the rest. Remember that convert is a string of characters. Remember that convert goes the opposite direction from cast. Also remember that you're not going to find convert on other platforms. Oracle, for example. Although it wouldn't surprise me if Oracle did this soon.
Dr. Smith, quick question. So this would like prevent you from using it as a logical test to say this date is greater than another date or less than another date?
You should do that before you get to the, let me turn your volume up a little. You should do that before you get to the convert. So convert is mainly when you're converting a date, you are mainly sending it out to be parsed. Okay. So if you're going to see, is it greater than, less than, what is the date, plus what is 90 days from today? I would not use convert until I finished. Then I would convert the answer for public consumption. Questions? Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I don't know what I'm doing here. I think I'm trying to do something. Let me see if this works. That's the problem with using these variables. You have to go back and declare the variable. Okay, convert my date to a varchar 107. I'm not sure why I did that. Let's look at this cast. Suppose I said cast 2/29/2019 as a date. And I tried to do this. What do you think will happen? Execute. And I get these red marks all over the thing. It says it failed. Why did it fail? There's no 29th of February this year. It's an invalid day. It's not a leap year. If I went, well, it's 2020. Next year, there'll be a 29 February. And that's why. Line 40 won't work. Why? Nope, line 40 isn't going to work either. Mm-hmm.
Because for the same reason, but try convert will work and give you a
right. This one also fails. So this is what I almost never use convert, unless I really need to see it. If I say try convert date and I give it an invalid date, instead of crashing, instead of erroring out, it gives me null. Now, I don't know, maybe there's a time when you want it to error out if it can't do it. Maybe you need to stop the world. Most of the time, if I have a bad date in there, maybe I need to check it and see, you know, maybe I need to go figure out what my bad dates are and write an SQL program to find the bad dates. Okay, where try convert date is null, and I could find all the bad dates. But this one, if try convert will try to do it. If it can do it, it does. So here's one that works. This one works. But if it can't do it, instead of erroring out and putting a bunch of red letters all over, but the errors are kind of bad because if you have a program running and you hit one of those errors, then your program aborts. Which is why we would say, you know, if object ID something is not null, drop the table. We don't want it to error out. Now I could get around that by putting, you know, I could say go drop table child, go drop table parent, and if one of them failed, it would just go by the go and it would start the next. So it would exit that batch, but it would exit to the next one coming. So it would, the go would pick up that issue. Go ahead, Juana. What's that now? Show me the.
For example, you say go to this page.
No, go doesn't mean go to. Go says stop everything, start over. Okay, and so if I have an error, for example, if I tried to run these guys as a batch, let's see what happens. Sometimes it used to anyway. Many of them are just going to give me an error here when I try to run it, because it's going to get to the first one and it's going to say, eek, I think it's going to just give me an error, and all I got was an error. Now, what would happen if I put a go here? Okay, I'm going to highlight this, and what I'm going to expect will happen, I will see the error, but then the go is going to stop and clear the error, I think, and notice that I don't know why it says one row affected, but it went ahead with it anyway. So a go would get me around that. Questions so far? Okay, since we're on dates, the current date timestamp is, this one is real handy. Select get date. Get date is what you would use if you were inserting. You can insert get date if you want to timestamp it. That's going to be a big one in our programs in the next class. We're going to timestamp lots of stuff as we're putting it in there. The timestamp works in milliseconds, and there's it makes a very good primary key, or can make a good primary key. So if you get the timestamp, notice it's 587 milliseconds, and that's going to be different if two people try to put it in at the same time. You're going to have different timestamps. So that makes a pretty nice little, it makes a good primary key if you don't have one. Just for your information, it's different in other systems. For example, does anyone remember what it is in Access? Now, N-O-W. And in Oracle, in Access, it's N-O-W, open parentheses, close parentheses, it is a function. In Oracle, it is sysdate, but it doesn't have the parentheses on it. So it's just this. This would be the code that would get that from sysdate in Oracle. And this guy, you will always see if you're reading the, if you go to the literature and you read it, you hear the SQL server people talking about, well, why don't we have Dual? Dual, D-U-A-L, is a dummy table in Oracle, and it's just because, for the same reason that we don't breathe from the back of our necks like dolphins. I mean, they took a different path of evolution. So anyway, this is how it would. This is what it would look like in Oracle. It's sysdate, but get date is what it is in SQL Server. So this is this is someplace where it's not entirely consistent. Every system has a way to timestamp it. Every way has and it's the date on the server, not the date on your computer. And this leads us into Module 11. Questions on Module 10?
Do we have some specific words in Oracle that we cannot be using?
What's that now about Oracle that we cannot?
I'm sorry, SQL.
SQL?
For example, in the language that I have been working, they have some specific name for the date. We cannot use it to put information. It's system word. Okay. Do we have some SQL?
We do, and generally speaking, the question is talking about reserved words. For example, get date, try convert, for example, is a reserved word. You should not use it. Now, what would happen if you specified, if you named a variable @ try convert? It would work. It would be very confusing. I recommend you not do it. Reserved words, you can create ambiguities that will cause trouble later. Go ahead.
But do we have reserved words for date, for time, for anything different from the function?
I'm going to talk about those right now in the functions, because we haven't got, chapter 11 talks about the functions. Okay. Chapter 10 is the data types. What are the big deals of chapter 10? Okay. Integers. Tell me about an integer. What are the properties of an integer that we have to worry about whenever we are programming, not just database, but whenever we're programming anything and we're using integers? We like integers. Why?
I forgot. It's like you don't like working with decimals.
We don't like decimals. We like integers. We hate floating point decimals. Why do we hate floating point decimals?
Because they have to round.
Right, they're going to have to truncate someplace.
That's what I
Mm-hmm.
was trying to remember.
Well, it brings in that tiny little error that accumulates, and that has a name, and that's a name that you should know, be familiar with. What's that called? I'm telling you what's going to be on the test. What's that called? Somebody can answer online if you want to.
Underflow.
Underflow. Underflow. Okay. All floating point decimals, floating point decimals, all have underflow. Now, where do we get underflow? When I have a decimal that I don't know how many, a decimal that doesn't terminate, will give me underflow, right?
And floating points are only good for significant figures. And
Well, if I fix that decimal and I say that in money, for example, you have 4 decimals.
yeah, that becomes an int.
It becomes an int because I'm going to divide that decimal, well, multiply the decimal out, work in integers, and then hand it back to you. Finally, I'm going to push the decimal back in 4 places when I give it to you. I know that will not underflow. So anytime I'm fixed, then I'm in an integer. What does an integer do? What's my worry about an integer? Overflow. How do I know when I've got overflow? Well, I'm going to get an error message.
When you get a number too big, like
Gets too big.
and if I'm not mistaken, it's 2 to 32, if I'm not mistaken.
No, about 4 billion.
About 4 billion. A little bit over 4 billion.
2 billion if it's signed. Somewhere around there, you're going to be worried about overflow. Okay.
Double is 264, if I'm not mistaken.
Double. I can go out and get a bigger number. I can go out and get, in other words, I'm throwing more money at it. I'm throwing more computer resources at it, but I don't get away from the problem. Every integer that's ever been made can overflow because there's a finite limit to it. And
that's when we get into floats.
What's that?
And the only times you get into floats is when you cannot represent a number with an X.
Well,
but
yeah.
They are only good for a certain number of significant figures.
Right. The underflow is that insidious error that I know is going to happen anytime I am doing something that I have degrees in, because degrees has a factor of pi in it. If I'm talking about 1 degree, I'm talking about pi divided by 180. So I have that thing called pi in there, and I'll never be able to get it down to the final.
That's why you cannot add 1 Google plus 1 on a calculator.
Right. You can. You have a problem with when you add very small numbers to very large numbers, you lose a piece of it each time. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see, char. What? So int and float. And let's see. There's one other thing I wanted to say.
Is 1 character.
Oh.
You got string.
Well, we don't use the word char, 1 character and string in database so much. If it's char, no, we don't have bool in database. Right. Okay. Right. When you say char, you're saying it is exactly this length. Yeah. It takes up, if you say char name char 10, you take up 10 characters for that. Okay. Now, if you say varchar, something is varchar. Lots of times I'll use varchar for things like physician's notes. I don't know how long they're going to write. They might just say, fine, saw the patient, he's dead. Okay.
Generally, you want to
use varchar.
Yeah.
I use varchar when I don't have any idea how big it is. If I know pretty well, I know pretty well how long a person's name is going to be. I can make a good guess what it is. And if it's over 32, they're probably used to having their name truncated. So I probably would give it 32, char 32. If it's a small value, I'm not going to fool with a varchar because I don't want to waste time making it smaller and larger. There's other things that come into play there, but Mostly char. Okay. What is in char and in varchar?
That will be the ones with the global.
Global.
characters,
Careful using that word global.
Or the not global, but the
other languages besides English. Came as a big shock to our system that there was other languages.
And those take up 2 bytes characters.
2 bytes, they take up twice as much storage space.
During back on the viewport.
So the question is always, do I, in my database, am I only going to store the English ASCII code letters? Or will I need to support other alphabets? If the answer to that is I need to support the other alphabets, go to in char and in varchar. What?
They are the global characters are more not Unicode characters.
They are Unicode, yes. That is 2 bytes. Okay. There was something else that crossed my mind a second ago that I want to talk about, but Okay, chapter 11, or module 11, excuse me. I gave the assignment for module 10. I have not, and I believe it's due today, but I'm willing to, I probably won't get to it until Monday, I don't expect. Besides, I don't have a hard cutoff. I think next semester, I'm going to say, you know, there's a due date, and then 2 weeks after the due date, it cuts off, or something like that. So I just don't have them sitting there forever. Okay, Scratch database, strtst is not null. Drop table string test. So this is we're talking here about functions. And the functions we're talking about are the functions that are built in to SQL Server. I'm not talking at this point about programming your own functions. Yes, you can write your own functions, and then you are free to use them. So you can create any function you want. You create it in this language called TSQL, and save it, and it's compiled and saved in the database, and you've created functions that do whatever it is you want them to do. These are the functions in module 11. They are built in. Okay, object ID strtst is not null. Drop the table. Okay, create the table string test. So I've got a name and a number. Both of these, notice, are character data. The number is char and the name is varchar. Talk more about that. Got a primary key in there. No, notice that this one right here, 68. No, check is not null. Okay, line 70. This is the first of our string functions. String functions come in two types of them. That we have what we call observer functions, and we have what we call constructor functions. Those of you who have taken Java have heard that term constructor before. An observer function gives me information about the variable. So for example, I can get the length of the string. It tells me something about the data that are in the string. How long are the data? How many characters do I have in that field? Okay. If I were to check the length of a char field, it would be 8, because it always takes up 8. So the length of char is always the size of the array. The length of a varchar can vary. So this one says string test 0 length, check len, the length of sname is greater than 0. In other words, you have to have at least one character in that string. I can have a string, I can have a varchar field that is not null, but it doesn't have any characters in it. So this isn't true on all of them, all databases, but many databases, I can check that a field is not null, and if that field has been defined as the zero length string, but doesn't have any characters in it, is not null will come back true. It's not null, but it doesn't have any characters in it. This causes people a lot of trouble. Access is one that does that. In Access, you can have a character field, a name, for example, that, yeah, I have a name, it just doesn't have any characters in it. Okay, this is how you would, this is the constraint that would get you around that. I'm not sure whether SQL Server needs both of these or not. I don't think it does, because I think when you check that it is not null, you are also checking that it has at least one character in it. I'd have to test it. I don't know for sure. I generally will write both of them if it's real important to me that I not get any fields in there, character fields that are empty as opposed to null. Then I would go ahead and put the constraint. Insert into strtest, the name and the number. Now notice that some of these guys are going in last name, comma, space, first name. Some of them, at least one, well, one, some means one, at least one. Some of them are going in first name, space, last name. Some of them only have one name. So I've got a mess here. If I had a very big table, I would have problems. Notice some other things about these guys over here. I have numeric data stored as characters. This is going to give me problems down the road. So anytime I have these characters, and I've got one of my first database issues was straightening out a database where it was something like this. Some of the stuff was in there. It was a ISD school district database back in the 80s. People weren't used to doing a whole lot of database stuff with schools. It's a brand new database. And they had all their student records stored last name, comma, space, first name, all in a field. Now this violates one of the laws of database, one of the three fundamental first normal form. What did we say? We said all records have to be unique. Well, no problem there. We said access by content only, no problem there. But what was the third one? A field has exactly one value. Tell me about this field that's Doe, comma, space, John. There are two values in that field. So when if I say that I'm in first normal form, I'm denying that I will ever go in there and talk about the first name and the last name when I put them both in the field like that. That field is a violation of first normal form. Okay, and yeah, I know sometimes they get violated. Okay, see the problem. And if I were to select from, if I were to order by snum, I'll execute this. I guess it would be good if I went ahead and, I haven't created it yet. Always a good idea after you create to do go before you start inserting. Just let everything happen. Now it should work. And notice that 3 to, let's see, this is descending. So we're going, so 3, 2, 1 comes before 1, 2, 3 as it should. But then look at 1, 1, 3, 4 comes before, since it's going down, and the null comes at the end. But that 1134 is out of place. Why? Because it's essentially alphabetizing them. It's treating them as it would appear in the dictionary. So in the dictionary, 1, 1, 3, 4 would come before 1, 2, 3. Okay. I'm gonna fix this for you. I chose to use a subselect here. Select sname as valid name from strtest. I want all of the names that have a comma in them. To get this, I'm going to appeal to char index. Now, if you go over to the reading assignment in your book and you look for char index, what does it probably mean? Char index, and then I say find a comma. Find the comma in what? Sname. Okay. Where does it start counting? That's the next question that you want to ask. Where do you think it starts counting? If my name is Steven, S-T-E-V-E-N, what is the char index of T, S-T-E-V-E-N? Well, it could be 2.
I think it's 1.
It could also be 1. In other words, do we start counting at 0? And we have this idea of, well, computer scientists start counting at 0, right? Not exactly true. The question is, are you counting the ticks or the tocks? Are you counting the beginning of the railroad car as it passes, or are you counting the completed railroad car as it has already passed? Do you count it as you see it coming to you, that's 1, or do you wait till it passes and say, that's 1 that went that way? Now the next car, let it pass. So are you counting, do you count the tick or the tock? And that's essentially what we're asking on a, when I ask about an array, do I count, am I counting the character or am I counting the spaces between the characters where there's a space after the character, okay? And in SQL, you generally do not start counting at 0. I say generally because it depends. So the first letter of your name is at char index 1. So if my name is Stephen, therefore the char index of T would be 2. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, if it's not there, it has a char index of 0. That's the signal that char index tells you. So I want to find the records where the character index, char index of the comma in the name is greater than 0. So this finds all the records that have a comma somewhere in the name. Okay. It takes one other parameter that you can give it. And it returns the index of the first comma. The next other parameter that you can give it is a third parameter that is optional, and you can give it a index at which to start searching. Okay. For example, if I wanted to throw out anything where the comma came right at the beginning, I would give it a 2. I say start searching for it at position 2. If you don't give it, it starts at the beginning. So I want to find all of these guys. Isn't blowing up very well. What? Never mind. You can also turn on Zoom if you want to, and then you'll see my screen. So I have 2 in there. I have 2 names that have commas in them. Blow, Joe, and Doe, John, have commas. The other 2, Jane Roe doesn't have a comma, and then one more, Sting. You guys know Sting. Have I aged out? Anyway, Now, I didn't have to say from, I just did this. I went ahead and chose to use a subselect here. I didn't have to, but this is going to, I'm just going to execute it again, make sure that everything is fine. And I'm getting it, and I have valid name, and this guy has a name, valid string test. Okay, since I know see if I can get everybody on the same screen here. I'm going to select from this valid name, in other words, these guys. And then I want the char index of the comma. So from valid name, I want a substring. What does a substring mean? Take out a piece of it. Where do I want to start? So if you look at substring, let's see, that would be a char index is an observer function. So an observer just gives me information. LEN and char index are the two major observers. I need to go to the next one actually. And I want to get the substring. The substring is here. Substring returns a specified number of characters, length, the third parameter, from the string, first parameter, beginning at position T. So I need three things. The string that I want to cut a piece out of, that's the name. Where do I start? How many characters do I return? Let's go back and look at this. Take it from valid name. Where do I start? Start at the char index of the comma in valid name. So go to valid name, find the comma, start there, and how many do I return? I'm going to say 100. I can get away with that because this is varchar. Now, if I had char and I said 100, I would get the full length of it. But this will stop with a varchar. So I don't know how big it is. I say 100 will give me plenty of room. Now, notice what I did here. I appended an X to it because I want to see that X, and I want to see that I'm not getting any extra spaces in there. I'm calling it first name. Okay. The rest of this stayed the same. Let's see if I got the first name. Notice what I got. I guess I need to. Yeah, there we go, Excel. Okay, notice that I got the comma and the space. But it's nice because I got two characters. I always got the two characters. So I have to make some assumptions here that I'm always going to have a comma and a space in these names. Well, what if it had two spaces? It's going to give me problems. Haven't gotten there yet. Now, I put the X on there. I appended the X at the end so I could see if I had trailing spaces. I don't have any trailing spaces, so I can get rid of the X. I just wanted to test it. So let's go back to this guy. And now I'm going to select substring again. Now this time I'm going to get rid of the X and I'm going to add 2. So I'm going to say the index of the comma plus 2. And that's the first name. Well, I didn't mean to close. Where's my... Oh, there it is. Now notice I've got a nice clean first name there. What's next? Let's get the last name. Where's the last name begin? At 1. How many characters do I want? Okay. I'm going to take the index of the character of the comma, the valid name minus 1, because where's the comma? J-O-E. Oh, let's see. Last name is Blow. B-L-O-E. Okay, it's 4 letters. The index of the comma is 5. So I want it from 1 to 4. And that's last name. So if I grab these guys, that's going to give me the last names.
If you didn't know about the leading and trailing spaces, would you do the L trim, R trim around those substrings? Or
yes, you could do L trim and R trim. And if you had trailing spaces, you could do R trim and get rid of those trailing spaces. I stuck the X there just to see if I had them. I think in a varchar, a varchar will automatically right trim. In other words, if you have spaces on the end of it just hanging there, the varchar is going to automatically trim them off for you. If you had a char, you would have to trim them.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Some databases give you the option of a trim instead of a L trim for left trim and R trim for right trim. SQL Server does not. You just put them together, right trim, and then you pass it left trim. So now I've got the last name, got a nice clean last name there. So I put it together, and I select first name and last name. And now I have exactly what I want. So first name, last name, first name, last name. So now I'm ready to go. Well, this problem manifests itself when we wanted to print the diplomas for the ISD. They didn't want their diploma printed Doe, comma, space, Joe. I'm going to go ahead and run through this. We're going to take a break here in just a second. Trust me. Okay, I'm going to put them, what about the names with no comma? I do about the same thing, except this one I'm going to go in and find a space. And this one I'm going to put together, and I'm going to, first name and last name will be reversed. And now what about single names? Go find those that don't have any space and don't have any comma. And I guess that's their last name. I guess is Sting, is that his first name or his last name? I'm going to assume it's his last name. I got to put it someplace. So then when I put it together, I'm going to put it together with unions. I'll let you take a look at this. I don't think I'm going to go through all of this stuff. Okay. I see everybody's eyes rolling back in their head. It's probably time for a break. So we will take a break. The color for today is pink. The answer to the quiz today is pink. And I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, I've been told that I'm now back recording again. I've been told that there are issues in the quiz, and that's okay. It's under advice, and I'm just going to really worry about it. I'm trying to get it up and running, but I wasn't expecting that it would run immediately. So obviously I'm trying to import and export, and it's not changing it's not changing it correctly, and it's bringing over some extra stuff. So I guess we'll.
The thing I'm trying to figure out is why for all of us we already have an attempt, even though we have.
Well, it's just when you try to do something weird to these academic suites, it just doesn't always work. There's a way to make it work, and I just need to figure out what that is. So I'm probably going to just go ahead and delete them and start over with it. So we won't get our knickers in a big knot over it. I'm going back to what I was doing here. Let's see, I am recording. Okay, now let's look at this next one, the numbers. And if I were to execute the numbers, notice that I'm expecting it to go up, but
they store as a string rather than by number.
So I have my number stored as a string. Notice I have a null there at the beginning. There's a null in cell B4 that's not showing as anything because it's null, and that's one of the problems that we have. So I have one of them's null, and then 1, 1, 3, 4 comes before 1, 2, 3 because that's the way it would come in the alphabet, because 1, 1, and then 1, 2. Now, how can I fix this? Well, there are several ways. The first thing I could do is I could change them to type char. If I, let's see, is it type char? I could put a leading 0. I could, pad with leading zeros to make sure that they were all, and I could do that with substring, and so get the substring and put zeros in there and pad it out. And if I had leading zeros in there, it would work. The other thing that I could do, I mean, and there is no, what is the fix? I'm going to cast it as an int. So if I cast it as an int, so I'm order by select snum from string test, order by cast snum as an int to order it. And when I execute that, now well, now it comes out right. Okay. Now, when it gets over here into Excel, Excel takes these things as numbers and treats them as numbers. Okay, you'd have the same problem in Excel if you stored character data. In fact, if you store character data in Excel, let's see, put a single quote on it. Notice that it left justifies it, and it puts a little tick up there. Warning, warning, warning. It's a number formatted as text, so it's warning you that you have text in there. So putting back to a number. But our problem over here in the database didn't get fixed. Let's put another one in there. We'll insert into string test Dodger, comma, space, Roger, and we'll insert 210. And it took it. So let's see what we have. So we've got Roger Dodger, Jane Roe in there is null, and all these other things. And let's see what happens when we, oops, crash and burn. Why did we crash and burn? This is a problem with, and I have a table that has 1,000,000 rows in it here, or something. And I don't have time to go through each one of them. I mean, you know, and I don't know what all I've got. I don't know what my problem is.
Oh, spaces after 210.
Spaces after? I don't think so. Okay.
The 210 for Roger Dodger went in as a varchar, an integer.
It's an O instead of a 0, right?
It's an O instead of a 0, yes. It's an O. 210 and not a 0. Very common mistake. Very, very common. I remember when I was just starting programming in the old BASIC programming language, and I had a program that was just doing something terrible. And remember back in BASIC, you guys ever program in BASIC? Beginner's all-purpose symbolic instruction code, which most people says was really a backronym. In other words, they thought of the name and then decided it had to mean something. You had a lot of go-to, so you had go-to 20, go-to line 30. And so I had a go-to line 20, but I typed 2-0, and it was just chopping it off and throwing it away, and it was going to, the control transferred to line 2, excuse me, and line 2, I had to clear all the variables and make it go back to nothing. Oh, I've spent days trying to figure out that problem. But yeah, it was something like this. I can get it like this. Now, notice some interesting things about this one. Notice that Roger Dodger is null. Now, when NULL comes across into the spreadsheet, it's a string. Notice that Jane Roe, this one's interesting. And what was the SNUM for Jane Roe? It was null. So when I did try convert on a null field, I got a 0. So when I said try to convert that to an int, it converted the null to a 0. That's something to watch out for. And then the rest of these happen like they should. Actually, 0 would probably be, unless I had negative numbers in there, then 0 is getting sorted correctly. That's one that I'm going to have to remember. Nulls get, when you do try convert to an int, and you give it, and the argument is null, you get 0. I did not know that. Now I do. I learn something new every semester. Okay. Issues with numbers stored as strings. Several ways you can do that. You can convert them to integer, cast them to integer. I would do try convert. If you needed to go in and find all of the invalid ones, you would do try convert. So I can select from string test where try convert. Try to convert it. This is going to show me all of my, why is he? What's my problem there? That should not be a problem.
You need to find int type.
What is it? Type is not a defined system type. Oh, yeah, okay. Try to convert int. Yeah. Brain fart. And this gives me the invalid ones. And so if I had a million rows in there, I would execute this, and it would find the invalid ones using this. If I try to do cast, it's just going to error out. But try convert lets me go in and search for invalid values, because he comes back as null. Okay. Want to call in this one we're going to do date diff. We talk about something before you start this one. Go in and refresh your data. In other words, before you start module 11, go in and run your create ap.sql. That will bring all of your dates up to current, because you're going to be asked for some of the exercises are going to say, show all of the invoices that are due in the next 30 days. Well, I got news for you. We started this class over 30 days ago. So when you ran that the first time, what happened? It set up this, and you had some that were due in 30 days. Now they're not due anymore. Now they've timed off. It was terrible because that the code that comes with the textbook was written in like 2011 or 2012 or something like that. And so, find all of them that are due in the next 30 days. Good grief, there's nothing that's due in the last 7 or 8 years. So anyway, I had to bring them all up to date. So I used this date. If you look at the code, and I send you to it in there, while you are refreshing it, take a look at the code. Go down there and look at where I calculate the dates. And I've documented it in there. I've written some little notes to you in there about what I'm doing. And so basically, I grab the date, today's date, and then I bring everything, set everything relative to today. So I give it, today plus 20 days in the future. And so I set them all that way. Now, date difference. Let me talk a little bit about the date difference. Date difference is the one that gives the students the most trouble. There's others, there's date add in there and stuff. First, the first parameter, how do you interpret it? How do you interpret it? It's interpreted as days. And then cast, well, anytime I'm working with a date, anytime I want to pass a date and I'm passing a literal, I'm always going to cast it. My guess is that I could live without casting it. I probably could have just said the string 4, 5, 19, and it probably would have worked. But I'm always going to cast it. And I'm going to ask you to do that too. So anytime we're talking about a literal date, we will always cast it. In other words, we'll never type in just 4/5/19 without casting it. So what's the difference between the 5th and the 6th? Well, we expect it to be 1 day. Let's see if it is. Execute, and it is one day. It says 1. Trust me, 1. I'm not going to put it into the spreadsheet. All you see is 1. Now, here's the important one. Subtract the second parameter from the third. So subtract this from this. Now that's a little bit backwards from the way I think. I think A minus B. Okay, it's backwards. It's this one, it's the one on the right minus the one on the left. Well, just remember that. Because if you write it the normal way, you're going to get a -1. Okay, that's 1. By the way, I can get the answer in hours if I want. Select date diff, execute, and I get 24 down there as my, I don't know whether you can see it or not. I don't think I'm going to put that in a spreadsheet just so you can see 24. But the answer for that one would be 24. I'll let you run it. 90 days from today. So what is the date, the date, that is 90 days from today? So we have an invoice that's due from the timestamp that's due date is in 90 days. This is real commonly done. This will give us the date that is 90 days from today, and that will be July. Look at it, it's the 4th of July at 11:35 and 38 seconds and 963 milliseconds. You see that movie Come Hell or High Water? Jeff Bridges. Oh well. They had something that they had to get their payment in. It's kind of a silly movie, so I guess I won't worry about it. Juana was asking me about other functions, names, and stuff like that. Here is one of them. These are not the SQL Server and SQL implementations in general have very rich date manipulation. They tend to be slightly different. And the question came up a minute ago about what about the names of these things? For example, here's one. What about this one, weekday? Can I declare a variable named weekday? Can I name a field in one of my tables weekday? The answer is that yes, but it's usually not a good idea. Your editor tries to tell you, by the way it color codes it, what is a word that they're using in the language. You might easily come to an ambiguity in your code, so I avoid them. And I always try to have my names be unique, not use something. For example, I would never make a field name named date. Why? Because date is a data type. You use it all the time. So you shouldn't name a field date. Name it invoice date. There's other things you can name it besides date. If you did, would it work? The answer is yes, because in one particular context, it would be an identifier that you used, and in another context, it would be a data type. We like to avoid that. Okay. Now, what am I doing here? Date name. What is date name? Well, that returns a varchar, and that returns Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. This is weekday. Interpret it as a weekday. Add 90 days to today, and tell me what day of the week it will be that is 90 days from today. Anybody know? Well, today's Friday. It's going to be a Thursday. If you go seven into 90.
91 and then
Yeah.
drop one.
Drop one. It's a Thursday. It'll be a Thursday. Which, I mean, I didn't really need to do that, but sometimes this number right here might be variable. And so you might be taking something from the database, and I want to know what day of the week will it be, this many days, and that value that I'm using might be in the database. It might not be just a 90 sitting there. The number 11, module 11 is a little trickier than the rest of them. It uses a lot of date adding and date differences. Date add, by the way, works the same way. Date add, you can say DD instead of just D, you can say DD. If you in this site that I gave you the link to it, this one, they give you all of the conversions, date and time codes. DD for day, HH for hour, and it goes on for several pages full of these codes. So codes for formatting stuff, it's just there. It's just, you don't bother trying to memorize them. There's one or two that you'll use commonly. 107 is one that I use fairly frequently for examples. But there are probably 75 or 80 different formatting codes. I'm not going to try to remember them. That's why I have the internet. That's why we have Google. Questions? I believe that's it. That gets us through module 11. And I will try to get where we'll have class next Friday. Then we lose a day on the 19th. And this is for spring holiday, they call it. I'm not supposed to say Good Friday, which is a religious observance. Not next Friday, it's a week from next Friday, 2 weeks from today. 2 weeks from today, we will not meet for class, and I'm trying to decide if I have enough time to get through it. I do if I don't take a day off for a test. So here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I propose. I'm going to merge the final and test 2. For those of you who did not get test 1 turned in on time, I'm going to go ahead and grade it. I still have it. And don't do 2 of them. I have to have a cutoff on tests because if I have to sit down and grade all of problem 1 all the way through, and then all of problem 2 all the way through. I don't do that for exercises. Exercises, I just run it and see how many, and see if the number of rows returned is looks right, and then I glance at your output, and then I glance at your code. For tests, I agonize a lot more over it, so I have to get them in. So don't, I will give you the date. I'm expecting that to be on the 26th.
Final.
The test 2, the final, yeah. And I will let you know how we're going to wrap up. Okay.
26th of April.
What?
26th of this month.
Yes. That'll be test 2. I'll probably have something, what I'll probably do on the final is I will probably make it an optional test, more like a retest for people who did not do well on test 1. You will have the option to take the final. Okay. And which will essentially be a retake. And so if you're currently happy with your grade and are caught up, then you don't need to worry about it, okay? Questions?
Hey, Dr. Smith, so this may be more advanced, but I was just curious, if you had a fairly complex nested conversion type statement, could you split that in half and assign one half to a variable and another half to another variable?
Yes, you could. Most of the time you'll do that just as you're working with it and trying to get it to do what you want it to do, and then you'll go back the other way on it and put it into back into its nested format, because it will run faster if you're not putting it into variables. Go ahead.
No, I've said, okay, that was my next question was, is it inefficient to do that, or was it bad practice?
As a rule, you will not ever be able to beat SQL by going in, because when you talk about assigning variables, you have stepped out of SQL and now you are in the wrapper language. Anytime you step into that wrapper language doing if, then, else, and looping and stuff like that, you've stepped out of the language. Somebody is trying to communicate with me. Nobody I need to talk to. I don't know. Have I answered your question? That should shut up in a minute.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Other questions? Questions on what we're doing? I'm going to make the assignment from chapter 11. I have not started grading module 10 yet. I did make it due today, but so I'm going to back off on it a little bit. So if it's not in today, that doesn't mean it's late or anything like that. I'll change that due date. And I'm not going to worry about the quiz. I'm just gonna I'm gonna delete those guys and start over. So it was all just a prototype anyway. And what I might do, you might see some quizzes. I might try running a quiz and say, okay, here, try this answer, and then I'll just tell you the answer at the beginning and see if I can get that working where I can create a quiz quickly from a template. They're not really designed to do that. I don't know how else. Anyway, okay, that's it for today. Fire drill. And I am going to now exit I'm going to exit Zoom so that this, so that I can get the stuff posted.
Thanks. Have a good weekend.
And you do likewise.